So that takes our total to 1,071, and there are now currently 4 active cases. Now, later on, the Deputy Premier will be giving an update on the pub in New South Wales, where we are now putting out a health alert, which is matching the New South Wales government about people who have visited that pub. But today we're very excited to be here with Professor Paul Young to talk about the developments now for the start of human clinical trials for a vaccine. This is once again Queensland and Australia leading the way. Queensland leading the way in that it's the first time that there will be clinical trials undertaken, but also too that there is a partner, and that partner is CSL. So that means that production of the vaccine can happen simultaneously at phase 3. This is excellent news. As I said yesterday, we have world-class scientists here in Queensland, and once again we are seeing the effects of that. We were very pleased back in March where we announced $10 million grant towards the development of this vaccine. $10 million, I think that has been very well spent. And in March, Professor Paul Young said to me that the clinical trials would be able to start in July, and he has kept his word. I want to thank UQ for once again showing that Queensland has the best of the best, that when it comes to developments, when it comes to setting the agenda, the work through UQ and its scientists is second to none. So this is a very exciting day today, and of course Professor Paul Young will now update us about the 120 volunteers. We put a call out and apparently 4,000 people wanted to register, but we've got 120 people that will undertake this, and I thank them for this. It's a very big step and a very exciting day for not just UQ but for Queensland. So I'll hand over to Professor Paul Young, and then of course the Deputy Premier will give us a further update. Thank you.
Thank you, Premier. Minister Miles, Deputy Premier, Minister Jones, our Vice-Chancellor, my Associate Paul Griffin from Nucleus Network, and my UQ colleagues who are here today. So thank you all for coming along today. Today we begin clinical trials of the UQ vaccine in, as the Premier said, 120 Queensland volunteers. I'd like to begin by pointing out that our efforts in getting to this milestone in quite a remarkable time frame has been the result of an amazing, committed team effort. So I'm here today representing the UQ team and all our colleagues in this endeavour. Our CEPI team, those at the Doherty Institute, the ANU and CSIRO, as well as our partners at CSL. But I wanted to particularly acknowledge my fellow UQ leadership team of Associate Professor Keith Chappell, Professor Trent Munro, Christina Henderson and Dr. Dan Waterson. So our studies so far have provided all the safety data and positive immune responses necessary for ethics approval for the trial to go forward, and that's why we're here today. This is the first in human, a randomised, double-blind, placebo-controlled study. There will also be dose escalation component to determine the optimal vaccine dose for future studies. So this phase 1 study will be assessing essentially vaccine safety and also immune responses to that vaccine. So 2 immunisations are going to be given to each of the participants 4 weeks apart, and we'll be measuring immune responses 4 weeks after each of those doses. So I'll be seeing some early data, just to give you a heads up, probably by the end of September. All participants will be monitored for a 12-month period after the first dosing. However, should safety be confirmed and early immune responses are promising, then our partner CSL will take the vaccine through further clinical trials from about sometime in the beginning of Q4 this year. So I was reflecting last night on where we all were at the start of this year. It seemed like about 3 years ago, but in fact it was only about 5 months ago. And a lot's happened since then. To see us at this stage of clinical testing, a mere 5 months after we selected our lead vaccine candidate to what was essentially a newly emerged global infectious disease threat, is simply remarkable. So in finishing, I would just like to thank all those who've provided unwavering support for our vaccine program, both within UQ, Team 1 UQ, and also externally. And I particularly want to thank our primary funders, CEPI, along with generous support that we received from the Queensland Government, from our federal government, foundations, and our many community donors. In the end, over 2,600 individuals contributed to the efforts to advance this vaccine. And as the Premier was saying, the approach we've taken is to advance manufacturing as fast as we can while we're doing these clinical studies. So whilst these studies are underway, we will still be working in the background along with our partner CSL to advance the manufacturing so we have this vaccine at scale when it's needed. Thanks very much.
Any questions for Professor Young?
I think we've got questions afterwards.
Okay, all right.
Should we-
Well, this is a momentous day for Queensland. Queenslanders should be rightly very proud of our researchers and our scientists who are leading the world in the race to find a vaccine for COVID-19, a key piece of the puzzle so that we can start saving lives globally from this disease. As the Premier has outlined, we have one additional case here in Queensland overnight, a returning traveller from the United States. They were in hotel quarantine, normally resident of the Sunshine Coast, giving us 1,071 total cases, 4 that remain active. Yesterday, Victoria confirmed they now had 1,484 cases. Of course, we will await today's update on the situation in Victoria, but our greatest concern now relates to a pub just off the Hume Highway in New South Wales in a town called Casula, the Crossroads Hotel. I'm told it's a popular stopping point for people travelling the highway, especially truckies. Late yesterday afternoon, after receiving this information, the Department of Transport and Main Roads alerted truck driving networks that anyone who has been to the Crossroads Hotel between the 3rd and the 10th of July should go and get tested. Police are now asking anyone arriving at the borders whether they have been to the Crossroads Hotel between the 3rd and the 10th of July, and we'd appreciate your assistance, the media's assistance, in getting that alert out throughout Queensland. There is a large number of people who have been through that hotel on those dates where there are now confirmed cases of both staff and patrons being infectious during that period of time, the 3rd to the 10th of July. This is a very large contact tracing exercise, probably one of the largest undertaken so far here in Australia, in order to allow New South Wales to bring their contact tracers back that have been assisting in Victoria. Queensland is working through the details of providing additional contact tracers to Victoria to assist with their outbreaks. We all have an interest in ensuring that the contact tracing for the Crossroads Hotel is undertaken.
Well, it's wonderful to be here today to officially announce, as the Premier has said, clinical trials starting in humans here in Queensland. This is a major step forward in the backing of this UQ science that we know is leading the world when it comes to combating the coronavirus. To think that it is a Queensland University, Queensland people, Queensland brains that could crack the coronavirus pandemic. It's a real proud day for every single one of us. Like the Premier, I want to thank the more than 4,000 Queenslanders that put their hand up to be part of the clinical trial. It just shows that when times are tough, Queenslanders always put their hand up. So as the Premier said, over the next few months, 120 Queenslanders will be part of this clinical trial. This is a huge step forward in the advancement, and as you've heard from Professor Young, we are doing this in record time. We know that the best way to unite and recover as an economy is to crack the vaccine, and it's wonderful that Queensland is now leading the charge globally in tackling the coronavirus vaccine. I do want to acknowledge and thank everybody in the team. They are working 24 hours around the clock every single day to deliver this vaccine for the world. And it would be an amazing feat if we were able to be one of the vaccines developed globally right here in Queensland. I want to echo the Premier's comments and thanking everyone that has been involved to date. We were very proud to be one of the first partners to put $10 million on the table towards this. We know that if we can deliver a vaccine, then that will be the fastest and quickest way for us to move on from the coronavirus. And I want to acknowledge and thank everyone in the team that is working so hard to deliver this vaccine in record time. And Vice Chancellor? Peter?
I just want to say thank you for all of you backing what UQ is doing for the community that, in addition to government contributions, really dug deep to make sure that we can deliver this for Australia and the world in the fastest possible time. Thank you.
Okay, happy to take questions. Anyone? Well, you'd have to talk to New South Wales and Victoria about that, because we haven't had outbreaks here in Queensland to be using the COVID Safe app. So thankfully good news at the moment, but of course, as I've said, it's really important that everyone keeps up with the social distancing. Look, we've seen images over the last couple of days of people not social distancing. You are putting everyone's lives at risk if you don't do it. So please continue with the social distancing, keep up with the hand hygiene. We are all in this together. Everyone has a responsibility to do the right thing to keep everybody safe in our state.
What is being done to enforce social distancing at night?
Jack, my understanding there is that the police are very concerned about what's happening, and they are speaking to a number of nightclub operators over the course of the next couple of days.
What about the Victorians who are trying to sneak into Queensland?
Yeah, not good. We've made it very clear that unfortunately, not at this time, Victorians cannot come to Queensland. We saw some people trying to get in a van. It's not on, and you will be caught and you will be fined. So those young people now have hefty fines that they now have to pay.
So the nightclubs, are the COVID safe plans, are they strong enough, do you think? Are they effective enough to stop people from mingling?
Well, see, the nightclub industry put in a COVID safe plan, and that is the plan they put into the Chief Health Officer. And if they breach that plan, there will be consequences, and the police are really looking at that. Look, I know it's tough times, everyone, but we're all in this together, and we have to make sure that we keep up with the social distancing. And that means if you are lining up to go into a cafe, a bar, a restaurant or a nightclub, you have to keep your social distance. Look, we are very concerned. I'll be getting another briefing later on today from the Deputy Premier and the Chief Health Officer. And of course, I know that our Chief Health Officer is in constant contact with all the other Chief Health Officers around the country. So the best thing that people can do is, if they have been to that pub, to self-isolate and get tested. I mean, it is absolutely crucial that we don't miss people there. So we're happy to help the New South Wales Government with this, and of course I'll be getting briefed later on today as well.
If this vaccine is successful, what do you think it will do for Queensland health?
Look, this is just wonderful. We've seen, of course, Professor Ian Fraser with the discovery of the cervical vaccine, which is saving lives throughout the world. This is great news for Queensland and Australia, but what's really important is that it can be manufactured here at the same time as well. That is really important. That has always been the missing piece of Australia. We've always had to get overseas companies to do that production. It can be manufactured here locally and distributed globally. So that is another win for Queensland and Australia.
Do you have an estimated value for the production towards Queensland and Australia to develop and export?
Well, of course, it'd be millions, if not billions. So one step at a time. We're at the clinical trials now, and I just want to thank the UQ team. The University of Queensland is a very distinguished university. I'm very proud alumni myself, but I can't be more proud today the fact that UQ has really stepped up in these times. And as Professor Paul Young said, a few months might seem like a few years, but we're all in this together, and Queensland once again leading the way. I think every Queenslander should be proud tonight.
There are other clinical trials underway around the country at the moment. What makes this one different, and what makes you want to back this one, other than it being a
Well, hang on. But first of all, it's in Queensland, and we'll always back Queensland. But like I said, it's the first one where you've got the clinical trial and the manufacture that can happen at the same time. So that's they've already got a partner in CSL. But I might get Professor Young to say some more words on that.
I think the Premier has just answered that question well, but it's the partnership with CSL, a manufacturer who can generate this vaccine at scale. So that's the important component, and that partnership was announced on June the 5th, so we're really excited about that.
So that fast track you from development to being able to...
Correct, and in fact we're already working with CSL to actually advance that manufacturing, so we're doing that in parallel with the clinical trials. So that's what makes this one unique in Australia.
Any vaccine has risks. What
All of the participants have been advised of the risks. I mean, in the context of the sort of vaccine that we're dealing with, it's a protein-only vaccine that has had a very safe transition in many of its guises in different vaccine targets before. So we're very confident that the safety issue is not a concern here. Like every vaccine trial, this may or may not succeed. It's not a guaranteed, but we're confident that we'll get through there to a positive outcome in the end. I think we're all watching each other. As I've said many times at these media conferences, we're not racing each other. We're all racing against the virus and trying to get there as quickly as possible. And as many people have mentioned before, this is a global pandemic, and we're going to need vaccines that can spread it right across the globe to the billions of people on this planet. And the only way we can do that is with multiple vaccines. So we're hoping that a number get through to the end.
What sort of hours would you be putting in? Is it really around the clock?
Pretty much, and sort of shift working as well to ensure that we do this as quickly as we can.
How realistic is this end of year date that's been talked about in the media that this vaccine will be ready by then? And how long from then will it be before people actually receive it at the end of the year?
I think in terms of when this vaccine is going to be available, that's always a question that we're asked, and to some degree that's a hard endpoint that we can't define. Our partner CSL will probably be a bit better placed to answer that question now, but the plan is that we're in place by the middle of next year.
For the vaccine to be finished?
Yeah.
And then before delivery, how long will it take?
That depends on the manufacturing, yeah. No, probably the middle of next year. So we have clinical trials that are beginning today and will progress all the way through to the beginning of next year. And it's depending on how those are going, there may be cases for emergency use of the vaccine delivered earlier, but in terms of large-scale rollout, middle of next year to end of next year.
Stage 3 trials. Could you just explain that process? Will it happen exactly at the same time or after the stage 3 trials?
So the manufacturing is beginning now. The processes are being worked up now, and the idea was to uncouple. The normal process for vaccines is a pipeline of activity, and manufacture only begins when you get regulatory approval. What we and many others have done now is uncouple that manufacturing stage so we can bring it forward and begin the process now. So the idea is that there will be vaccine at scale when that regulatory approval is provided.
When would you expect the vaccine to be ready for emergency use as planned?
Again, I'd be pulling them dates out of the air, but we're hoping the beginning of next year we might be in a position to do that beginning of next year. Now, there have been a number of moments. The excitement of actually identifying a lead vaccine candidate, which was back in February the 14th, and then progressing that through all of the animal studies to show that it actually induces the right immune response. So there'll be multiple milestones, but this is a big one. Everyone is excited about the fact that we can now progress this through into clinical stage trials.
Premier,
Last question.
you had the chance to read Peter Beattie's ideas to kickstart employment in Queensland. What did you make of them? Why did you feel the need to point out the
Look, we welcome everyone's ideas, but we have our own road to recovery where everyone is working on getting people back into work. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, everybody right to go? Very good. Thanks for joining us for the daily update. We have 3,967 cases of coronavirus in Victoria. That is 177 new cases since we last updated you. 25 of those 177 are connected to contained outbreaks. 151 of those cases are under investigation by our dedicated public health team, and one is from hotel quarantine. We have, yesterday we had 22,943 tests, and again I want to thank every one of those people and indeed every Victorian who in such unprecedented numbers is coming forward to get tested. As I've said so many times, but we'll keep saying because it really is a critical point, that's in some ways the most important contribution people can make. If you've got symptoms, even mild symptoms, come forward, get tested. There's more than 150 test sites open right across the entire state. That surveillance, that data, that information allows us to deal with the very clever enemy that we are up against, a virus that spreads rapidly, a virus that will defeat us if we don't have the best information and, of course, Victorians following the rules. To that end, can I again extend my profound gratitude, my thanks to every single Victorian who is doing the right thing. That's the vast majority of people across our city, across our suburbs, right across our state. It's a powerful contribution that you're making. I said yesterday, and I'll again make the point, our nurses, our doctors, our AMBOs, all of those clinical staff, we shouldn't see them as the front line in our war against this virus, our battle against this virus. They're the last line of defence, and we can't leave it to them treating patients in intensive care. They are not really, they ought to be seen and we should be grateful in every sense for the work that they do, but we've got to see ourselves, each of us, as the real front line in our fight against this virus. And the way we can make the best and most powerful contribution is to follow those rules, do the right thing, exercise good judgment, use common sense, and of course come forward and get tested even if you've got the mildest of symptoms. Our health workers are heroes. They do an amazing job. If we want to thank them, one of the ways we thank them is by acknowledging that it is us that is on the front line. We are there, and if we follow the rules, then we can play our part, a really powerful part in driving down these numbers, driving them down to a controlled and contained level, and then being able to move beyond the very difficult and challenging circumstances that we face at this time. With 22,943 tests being conducted yesterday, that takes our total test number to 1,148,357. That is an enormous amount of testing. That testing rate is among one of the highest per 100,000 anywhere in the world. And again, I'm very, very grateful to everybody who has come forward and got tested. Please keep coming forward to get tested if you have even the mildest symptoms. It lets us know where the problem is, how we can deal with it, how we can trace and provide the best public health response. We have 72 Victorians in hospital. 17 of those are receiving intensive care, and there are 1,612 active cases across the state. The key point, again, to emphasise is that, of course, driving in this morning, freeways, very, very light traffic. We're seeing lots of places that would normally be hosting large numbers of people. We're seeing very small numbers of people out and about. That says to me, plus not just the anecdotal, but the actual data that we get around mobility and movement, we are seeing people moderate their behaviour. They're changing their behaviour significantly. That's what being on the front line in our fight against this virus is all about. Everyone making a contribution for you, for your family, for your community, for every family and the entire state. If we all keep following those rules, then this strategy will work. We will bring this under control. We will be able to resume opening up. We'll get past this very difficult set of circumstances we face. To the vast majority of people who are doing the right thing, I again say thank you so very much. To those who aren't, Victoria Police, as I said yesterday, and I'll keep on saying it, Victoria Police, the last time they issued many more warnings than fines. They're not mucking about. The time for warnings is over. They'll always use good judgment, fair judgment, but if you are out there just breaking the rules and you're betting that you won't get caught, the odds are not good. You will get caught and you will be fined. So please, it doesn't have to come to that. It really doesn't. If everyone just plays their part, uses common sense and good judgment, if people, again, acknowledge that the front line of this virus fight is every individual, every family, every community. It's not good enough for us to just rely upon our doctors and nurses in hospitals to be the ultimate defence against this thing. We've got to stop it getting to that point. We've got to stop it getting to the point where we have thousands of people in hospital and hundreds of people needing a machine to breathe. I will also just make the point as well, we've seen tragedy obviously over these last 6 months. The world has seen tragedy as well. It's not just an illness of the frail aged, not that that makes it any easier to deal with, but I have a message for every single Victorian. This has taken the life of otherwise healthy people of all age groups. The notion that this is simply something that will be tragic if you are very ill already and very old, that is simply not right. This can have catastrophic outcomes, tragic outcomes for people who are otherwise healthy and for people in any age group. On that basis, we all have a part to play to make sure that we're not just relying upon our nurses and doctors to get this job done. We all have to acknowledge this is a clever enemy. It is silent in many respects. So many people have this and have very moderate symptoms. It is so wildly infectious. We've all got to play our part. That's how we will get to the other side of this. That's how we will defeat this virus. The alternative is these numbers continue to grow, and well, that is not a situation that we want to be in at any point. This lockdown will continue for as long as it needs to, but it need not be there for a moment longer than is absolutely necessary if everybody simply follows the rules and does the right thing. And again, thanks and praise and gratitude to everyone who is doing the right thing. That's the vast majority. And to those who aren't, well, police are out there in force. Can I just make reference to the fact that Pat McGorry from Origin is here today. You'll know that we launched a roughly $60 million mental health package some time ago, and Martin Foley and Pat will speak about the way we're using technology to support the best care, particularly for younger people who are experiencing a whole range of stress. There's a significant challenge, a mental health and wellbeing challenge wrapped up in all of these measures and the fight that we're in. And Pat and Martin will speak to that in just a moment. Before they do that, it is perhaps best if Brett just adds to my daily update, and then Martin will speak, and then we can take any questions. And I think Pat and others from Origin are available to give you some comments at the end of our press conference. Martin, Brett, you can go next.
Thank you, Premier. So 177 new cases today, clearly lower than the maximum number that we've had on any one day. I think I've always been calm in these presses, but I have never been complacent. I'm not going to be complacent about today's number. It's great that it's lower than our peak, but it may not be our peak yet. So I would like to see a week of decreasing numbers before I come and say that I've got greater comfort about the direction we're going in. But as a reflection of the actions that people took a week or more ago, I think it probably is a good sign that this is exactly what happens when people are following the stay-at-home directions, isolating and testing appropriately and minimising their contact with others. This is exactly what we will see as people do the right thing, and it will continue to drive down if those behaviours are sustained. So that's a small bit of optimism in today's numbers. With respect to outbreaks, and again, you know, there are 4 or 5 new outbreaks every day. The numbers change significantly, and with close to 200 new cases, the linkages that happen over subsequent days always change those numbers. But I'm aware of 6 cases linked to La Mana supermarket in Essendon, 12 cases linked to Somerville Meats. That setting is closed, but these are cases that are subsequently cropping up in all of the staff who are in quarantine. 8 cases linked to Senvic Construction in Footscray. Riverina Apartments, they're called. 26 cases linked to Menarok Life Aged Care Facility in Essendon. That's a big aged care outbreak. A number of staff and a number of residents have become infected in that outbreak. but that's being very intensively managed at the moment, including transfer of some residents to acute care. 13 cases linked to Glendale Aged Care Facility in Werribee. 144 cases linked to the Al Taqwa College outbreak, and we've got 2 cases linked to Japara Central Park Aged Care in Windsor. So again, aged care not surprisingly represented in outbreaks. The vast majority of our aged care outbreaks have involved 1 or sometimes 2 staff and no residents. Again, that's a measure of staff identifying themselves as soon as they become unwell, and very extensive testing of residents and lockdown in those aged care facilities. But they are critically vulnerable, and we need to manage them as closely as we possibly can.
Thanks. So we know that doing the right thing and following the rules and staying apart and following the social distancing guidelines is the right thing to do to drive the curve of infections back down. But we know that it also comes at a cost sometimes of mental health and well-being. That is why earlier this year we, as part of the initial pandemic response, funded a $59.4 million package to support not just frontline services, Beyond Blue, Lifeline, Smiling Minds and a whole heap of other frontline phone, digital and community-based services. But we also funded Orygen. Orygen Youth Mental Health Services is the world's leading practice and research institute and provider for youth mental health services. And we funded them to bring on their eOrygen platform to deliver services for those young people 16 to 24, funded that age group to deliver online supported mental health practice and support to get them through these tough times. And it's part of the $59.4 million package was $6 million to Orygen to deliver that service in partnership with Headspace and a whole range of other specialist youth mental health providers. So I'm really pleased today that in a record period of time that Orygen are now launching the MOST platform, MOST standing for Modulated Online Social Therapy Platform. It's not an app, it's a real world provision of services that meet the needs of mildly or acutely unwell young people to get the support they need in a safe and indeed sometimes quicker way than they would in any other measure. It's initially going to be rolled out in the north and western suburbs of Melbourne. It will be rolled out, and I'm pleased to say that in partnership with the mental health providers in the Flemington and North Melbourne communities will be specifically available to young people in those towers and their communities via their community mental health provider, CoHealth and other providers. And it will be there to take young people through all the supports they need, whether it be that therapy for mild or acute mental illnesses, whether it be through support for peer-based worker and other supports, whether it be for vocational support, whether it be for recovery and resilience support. All the things that Orygen and Headspace are world famous for in the real world will now be online and progressively rolled out over the rest of Victoria over coming months ahead across all availabilities for young people in those areas. We know that it's a tough time for mental health and wellbeing, particularly for young people. We know that 70% of mental health presentation conditions that occur later in life first present in this age bracket. So it is so important to get this facility and this service out in those high needs communities first and then progressively rolled out across the rest of the state. This is in addition to a whole range of the pandemic mental health responses that we are delivering, whether it be through the frontline service support to Beyond Blue, Lifeline, Suicide Prevention Line, specialist providers for perinatal and maternal mental health support, eating disorders, a whole range of specialist programs as well. We know that doing the right thing when it comes to social distancing and driving this curve down again is the right thing to do, and we will be there, particularly for young people, to make sure that we give them every assistance and every guidance to make sure they get through this and that they come back stronger and better than ever. I might leave some initial comments there, and I'm sure Professor McGorry and his team would be more than happy to answer in a lot more specific detail than I possibly could.
Happy to take any questions you have.
Just to clarify from Brett, you said 144 cases linked to Al-Taqwa as part of those outbreak. Is that what the cumulative figure so far?
Well, I might have something more specific. Yes, I understand that it's the cumulative figure. 28 are in staff, 76 are in students, 16 are close contacts who will be in the households of those staff or students. There are a further 22 under investigation.
So how many new cases today are linked?
I don't know the number of new cases for today for Al-Taqwa.
What's been done to prevent further cases in the Housing Commission towers, particularly those ones that weren't subject to the initial lockdown?
Essentially, we're really trying to roll in a public health model of response in all of the other towers that involves a real focus on prevention. So that's hand hygiene, the alcohol-based hand rubs availability, the deep cleans, the multiple high-touch surface cleaning in those environments. But the really key element is making sure that we engage with the communities within those towers, allow them to test whenever they want to, with the mildest of symptoms, and support them in their isolation and the quarantine of their close contacts. There has been much more intensive in-reach in some of the towers in Carlton, for example, where testing has really gone door to door to check in with community members to see whether anyone wants to be tested. And for a couple of towers that's included symptomatic and asymptomatic individuals, because when you've got significant numbers in a closed setting, then asymptomatic testing can be appropriate to pick up further cases. That tends not to be the case in general drive-through and community testing, but in very concentrated outbreaks, broad testing of symptomatic and asymptomatic people can be very useful, and that's happened in Carlton.
I guess I'm aware of some cases in those Carlton towers back in May, and I guess if so, should these interventions have started earlier?
I'm not sure exactly when the first cases cropped up in Carlton, for example, but all of those individual cases get the support of isolation, quarantine and follow-up of close contacts.
We're seeing abattoirs, aged care staff, public housing towers as well. Is there a concern that this virus is hitting sort of communities with lower paid, less secure workers more than the rest of us?
Yeah, absolutely. We know that pandemics can really shine a light on social inequality and economic inequality. People who have more insecure work and are really obliged to come to work are obviously more likely to turn up with mild symptoms. So it is a challenge, and we have to reach into all of those community members in order to understand how best to support them for the things that we know that will work, the isolation and quarantine. I do want to say, you know, it really is critically important not to come to work even with the mildest of symptoms. People who test positive and who require time off work in order to isolate or quarantine have the hardship payments available in Victoria. I hope that gets really broadly broadcast, because that's an important thing for everyone to understand, that you shouldn't feel obliged to come to a workplace with mild symptoms, and there are really significant consequences for outbreaks in some of those sensitive settings.
Can I just ask you on that issue? Sure. Is that something that, I don't need to make the hardship payments, but the fact that this seems to be happening in those lower paid communities, is that something that you can try and address?
Well, that's what the hardship payment is all about. There are a number of people who have to make that very difficult choice between what's good for public health and the survival of their own family. From a economic point of view, they look at their bank balance and they can't say no to the shift, they can't say no to the boss, and they will go to work even though they have mild symptoms, perhaps even worse than that. In order to avoid anybody having to make that choice, in order to ensure that everybody can put public health first, that $1,500 no questions asked hardship payment, if you don't have sick pay, if you don't have another opportunity, another avenue to have your income essentially guaranteed during your period of illness or the period that you have to isolate. I can get you an update, Rich, on how many people have actually applied for that. And I think you'll see that that's coming from a whole range of different industries, a whole range of different families, but there'll be some common links there. And I think this notion of insecure work and not necessarily having a safety net to fall back on as part of your individual employment circumstances, it can drive people making that choice to be less concerned about public health than we would like. That's why we've put that payment in. The last update I got, there were certainly many hundreds of those payments have been made, but I'm more than happy to try and get some more contemporary data for you.
I understand you've accepted the PN's offer of another 1,000 ADF troops. What will they be doing down here?
That's still being worked through in terms of the exact roles that they'll play. We've got, we're in constant discussions about whether it be Commonwealth public servants, ADF staff, anybody that can assist us regardless of what uniform they wear. In the current challenge that we face. We've got a number of requests that are outstanding. That is, we're just slowly, gradually working up to fulfil those requests that have been made some time ago. That does take time. You can't stand these things up in a matter of hours. So we've got ADF. You've seen them out there. They're doing a fantastic job alongside Victoria Police, alongside all of our emergency services, as well as our public health team. In terms of the exact deployment, the nature of that work, and how quickly those 1,000 staff will get here, I'll have to come back to you on that. That's still being worked through by people like EMV, public health team, my department and others, and of course the Chief Commissioner has got a direct role in that also.
And are you able to go through what you're doing to boost contact tracing teams? We've had reports of people getting automated messages telling them that they're eligible to leave quarantine 7 days before they actually are. What's being done to prevent
well, it's a very big team. It's a very big team, and they're making contact with an even larger number of people each and every day. And there will be, from time to time, human errors will be made. That's not the example that I'd had cited to me. It was in fact the other way around, where people were given more cautious advice than they probably should have been given. But look, it's a big team now. As I said to you the other day, it will need to continue to get bigger. I'll have some more announcements to make in relation to some Ambulance Victoria staff that will be going across there, a whole range of private sector companies who've got specialist skills from a call making, call taking, customer service, outreach point of view, people who really are well and truly skilled and versed in doing that work. That team is bigger than it's ever been, but it's going to have to get bigger, and that's exactly why we're working so closely with every Victorian government agency, as well as the Commonwealth, and indeed we have support from other states. Now, some of those team members are not in Melbourne. They're making phone calls, they're conducting detailed interviews, and that's the key, that first interview, to try and get the scope of a person's movements. Who have they been close with? Who have they come into contact with? What's the total field, if you like, of where they might have taken the virus? Those initial interviews, many of those are done in Melbourne by a big team, but there are also lots of those interviews being done from other state capitals, and we're very grateful to other state governments who've provided us with some of their very best public health physicians and public health experts to get that important job done.
I'm hearing reports of some of those interstate teams being given lists of people they need to contact, not people who have tested positive, but they're close contacts. At the end of the day, when they should have been able to contact them during the day, should that be happening? Are you in a situation where the team's just not big enough and you're playing catch up?
No, I wouldn't describe it like that at all. And what I can say to you and to all Victorians is it's a massive team, and everyone's doing the very best they can. It is challenging, always challenging. You are, after all, having to reach out and communicate with many thousands of other humans each day, and there's a whole lot of variants and vagaries and all manner of challenges in that. It's not simple work. If it were, then, well, this would be a very different challenge. At the moment are having to make contact with thousands of people from one night at one pub. We are having to contact thousands and thousands of people each and every day, and our team is big. It's growing further as cases grow. We're very grateful to the partnerships we have. We're very grateful to the support that we've been given, and I think you'll see that team get even bigger in the coming days and weeks, because that's exactly what the pandemic asks of us.
Have you established how many false texts went out telling people that they can leave quarantine in the nation?
No, well, the report I had was that it was the other way around. People were told that they were negative, but that they should stay at home. It's a small number. I'm not entirely sure of the exact number, but it's in the order of 100 odd. I think that was the last report that I got. Let's not lose sight of the fact that there's contact being made with 8,000 people every single day. I think the advice I had was that the advice provided to those 100 or so people was more cautious rather than less. Of course, we apologise for any inconvenience, but when you're dealing with that many people in such a fast-moving and dynamic environment, I'm sure Victorians can appreciate that sometimes somebody will attach the wrong spreadsheet to a text message, and a small number in the scheme of things of errors may be made. That's part of a massive logistical effort.
So at this stage, there's no...
Everyone ready?
Thanks.
Not that I, no, Nick, not that I've
Thank you
seen.
very
I'm more
much.
than happy to-
I'm here to give you an update on the status of COVID-19 in New South Wales. And it's actually a very complicated picture, so I'm going to take it through slowly and then very much happy to answer any questions. So there were 14 new cases of COVID-19 were diagnosed in the 24 hours to 8 p.m. last night, bringing the total number of cases in New South Wales to 3,303. An additional 7 cases have been reported to noon today, linked to people at the hotel. So of today's new cases, 4 are returned travellers in hotel quarantine, and pleasingly the 2 residents acquired their infection in Victoria, but the pleasing component is that both cases were self-isolating on their return to New South Wales, and the cases have no identified close contacts in New South Wales because they followed the public health advice on their return from Victoria. 8 cases identified yesterday to 8 p.m. include 5 who attended the Crossroads Hotel in Casula, and 3 are contacts of cases who are at the hotel, and they are isolating. So the 5 cases who were at the hotel, including the Southwestern Sydney teenager who worked at the hotel on several days, including the 3rd of July and also the 9th of July, a Southwestern Sydney woman in her 40s who had dinner at the hotel on the 3rd of July, a Southwestern Sydney man in his 40s who had dinner at the hotel on the 3rd of July, a Victorian man in his 20s who had dinner at the hotel on the 3rd of July, and a Sydney man in his 20s who had dinner at the hotel on the 3rd of July. 4 of these cases were reported by media yesterday, with the addition today of the Sydney man in his 20s who attended on the 3rd of July. There were 3 cases who were close contacts of the cases who went to the hotel: a Southwestern Sydney woman in her 60s, a Southwestern Sydney woman in her 30s, and a Southwestern Sydney child. So today, an additional 3 cases have been identified in people who attended the hotel, including a Southwestern Sydney man in his 40s who had dinner at the hotel on the 3rd of July, and contacts with other cases in early July, a Southwestern Sydney woman in her 20s who was at the hotel on the 3rd of July, and a Southwestern Sydney man in his 30s who had dinner at the hotel on the 4th of July but had contacts with other cases early in July. So today, 4 cases who were close contacts of the cases who went to the hotel are 2 Southwestern Sydney teenagers, a Southwestern Sydney child, a Southwestern Sydney man in his 30s. And a further case was an indirect contact, or a 3rd generation, a tertiary case of the hotel case, a Southwestern Sydney woman in her 50s. So if I summarise the number of cases, and remembering that there were those 2 original cases that we described, a Southwestern Sydney woman in her 30s who had dinner at the hotel on the 3rd of July, and a Blue Mountains man in his 50s who had dinner at the hotel on the 3rd of July, who also had 3 contacts who developed the infection. So in summary, at the Roads Hotel, we've got 10 linked to that, and then another 11 linked to those cases. And I think that this highlights the importance of the contact tracing efforts. And can I also thank very much the community for the response to present for testing. Those efforts have allowed us to identify all of these cases and effectively block any further transmission. And you can see that when we've got some cases that were actually contacts of cases, you can see how rapidly COVID-19 can spread if we do not act promptly. And I cannot express my gratitude enough to the health teams that stood up to undertake the testing, but most importantly, the community that have come out in such numbers to get tested and responding to the messages. There has also been some other sites that we do want to highlight, because obviously these cases did not realise they were infectious, and as I said, the infectious period can be before the period prior to onset of symptoms, and some people also had very mild and minimum symptoms. So one of the cases who attended the gaming room at the Picton Hotel on the 4th, 5th, 9th and 10th of July. The hotel has been closed for cleaning, but New South Wales Health is urging people who are at the hotel, especially those in the gaming room, to self-isolate for 14 days since they were last there, and to attend a clinic for testing, even if they don't have any symptoms, and watch for symptoms and get retested should any subsequently develop. And it's important that a negative test does not provide that clearance. We need you to be absent from that facility for 14 days since your last exposure. There's also a number of other venues that have been identified where the cases have potentially gone whilst infectious or potentially infectious. And we are being quite wide-ranging and identifying these sites and taking a very precautionary approach. So from the 6th to the 10th of July, one of the cases attended the Planet Fitness at Casula. On the 4th of July, one of the cases attended the Star City Casino between 2000 and 22:30 hours. On the 4th of July, Canterbury Leagues Club between 2300 hours and 0100 hours the following day. On the 5th of July at lunch at Cook at Kurnell between 11:30am and 12:30pm. On the 5th of July, dinner at Highfield Carring Bar between 6 and 9pm. And the 6th of July, dinner at the Merimbula RSL between 6 and 9pm. On the 7th of July, breakfast at the Waterfront Cafe at Merimbula from 8:30 to 9:30am. On the 4th and 5th July, Murray Downs Golf Club. And the 6th of July, the Narellan Town Centre Shopping Town at Kmart, Target, Best and Lest, H&M and the food court area. And on the 27th of June, the Zone Bowling at Villawood between 11am and 3pm. So while investigations are underway, New South Wales Health urges anyone who attended these venues at these times to watch for any COVID symptoms, and if they occur, to isolate and get tested from COVID right away. So we're not actually asking people to isolate themselves. The interviews have highlighted that either the individuals were unlikely to be infectious at these times, or the nature of the contact at these venues was minimal, but we do want to highlight these settings and ensure that people are appropriately isolating. If information changes, we will provide an update. I would like to stress that we are extending the time of the COVID clinic at the Crossroads Hotel and looking at also for an additional sites. There will be a clinic at the Picton, at the Imperial Hotel in Picton, and that will be open from tomorrow. So just wanted to thank you and take questions.
So in regards to all those various venues you've just mentioned, just to clarify, one of the 21 people, whoever it was, has been to one of those venues. That's how it works?
That's correct. There were a number of those venues in the Merimbula and Murray Downs were related to two notifications we'd received, in terms of Victorian visitors who were subsequently alerted to us by the Victorian Health Department as being positive. So some of those, particularly in relation to those sites, and we'll tease that out in the press conference, but they were related to visitors from Victoria.
So those Victorians, had they been to the Crossroads Hotel?
No, they had not.
So these are just
these are just separate venues that
be on alert.
be on alert. That's a combination of people, and we'll tease that out in the press release so that you can make it distinct. But there were 2 cases in Victorians who were holidaying here, who were subsequently notified to New South Wales Health that they were positive and potentially infectious, and some of those venues relate to those individuals. The others relate to cases associated with this Crossroads cluster.
Is that the Caravan Man? Those 2 venues in the shop?
No, they're additional to the your term, the Caravan Man. So no, they were additional, and they were just notified to us by Victoria Health.
And what about the 17-year-old who was in Tathra? Is that the Merimbula cases? Or?
No, that's a different case. So these are 2 new cases that have just been alerted to us that were when the contact tracing occurred, it was recognised that they had been in New South Wales. These cases were diagnosed in Victoria, and Victoria Health notified us late last evening, and these are the sites that those individuals visited.
Given that they did come up across the border, obviously either illegally or legally, does it go to show that maybe the border should have been closed sooner?
Look, obviously, we took a range of actions to message around not travelling to New South Wales, and requested that people out in terms with the hotspot areas were not travelling and were requested to self-isolate. So obviously the key issue that I'm focusing on is the fact that these individuals had presented for testing, we've diagnosed them, and we can then work with the community to get awareness out and for the community to come forward for testing. At the moment, whilst our focus is being drawn to the Crossroads Hotel, I think it's an important message for the community more broadly that this is a critical time where I urge you to come forward for testing. If you have an itchy, scratchy throat, a bit of a runny nose, the mildest of symptoms, please come forward and get testing. You can see that through the initiatives of the doctors in these cases that undertook the testing, how we have then been able to intervene, recognise these cases and block chains of transmission. And so that's my one message to the community. Please come forward for testing. I would also like to urge those people who have been particularly anywhere in Victoria, but in particular the areas of Greater Metropolitan Melbourne and the Mitchell Shire, it is incredibly important that you adhere to the self-isolation requirements and that you present for testing with even minimal symptoms.
Has there been anyone who was let off the Jetstar flight from Melbourne without being screened in Sydney that's since tested positive to COVID-19?
No, I'm not aware of any of the passengers on that flight being tested positive.
Just back to the Crossroads Hotel, do we know anything about the identity of the patient zero, so the person that kind of started that cluster? And if so, did they sign in when they came into the pub? And if so, did it indicate that they were from Victoria?
So our investigations are ongoing as to the source, and as it's very important that we investigate this thoroughly before disclosing what we think is the origins. We are awaiting further testing results, and I'm expecting those results to be in the next few days, and at that point we can update you. But clearly we are pursuing, it's a pivotal part of the investigation is whether these cases can be linked to any travellers from Melbourne, because that gives us comfort that we're not missing another avenue of transmission. So obviously we're working very hard to establish the source, the initial index case, but it's premature to speculate. We need some further testing and specialised genetic testing of the virus strains to see if it matches.
Do you suspect that it could be one of these that you've already caught?
No, we actually think, we do have some avenues of investigation that we are pursuing. and it does revolve around, it is related to some of the individuals that I've disclosed associated with the Crossroads.
Is it are we worried about the Victorian people who have been there?
Obviously, a hypothesis is that this may have been introduced through contact in Victoria, but we have to remain open-minded. What's most important is we don't go down one path without keeping a very open mind. I think it's premature for me to conclude how this came about. I need a few more days to do the relevant testing to inform my views.
Did Crossroads Hotel follow its COVID safe plan?
The Crossroads Hotel had a COVID safe plan, and we were able to get contact details of a large number. When we've asked and requested the lists, we were provided with them, and we have been using them. I think the issue of implementation is probably something that we need to look at. Environmental health officers have been at the hotel, and I would like to acknowledge the fact that the hotel's been very cooperative, but that's probably for a discussion after we get over this hump of trying to identify all cases.
Are you looking at truck drivers who may have stopped off at the hotel between the Sydney-Melbourne run?
We certainly have made, because we recognise the location of this hotel is on main transit routes, we have been working with our colleagues in other states and territories to ensure that they're aware of this cluster of outbreak, and they can take appropriate actions in increasing awareness through those states and through the freight network and others who may be just travelling through. This is called the Crossroads Hotel for a reason. It is on a popular route, and we want to make sure that the message is far and wide. But we do work very cooperatively across the states and territories and share information. So from the earliest stage, we have been sharing this information with our colleagues in other states and territories.
And has the COVID Safe app helped in tracing the cluster from the Crossroads Hotel?
We continue to incorporate questions around the COVID Safe app in our contact tracing. It hasn't been the major feature. Clearly the record keeping and the fact that we were able to identify people who attended the day. But also, can I just say, the media and getting the messages out, we've seen an incredible turnout of the community. And again, can I extend my appreciation to the community for that massive turnout.
There were some contact tracers that we sent down to help in Victoria. Have we recalled them?
So in terms of the contact tracers, we can do that effectively remotely. And so we've done over 300 case interviews for Victoria. At the moment, some other jurisdictions are also coming on board to support Victoria, and at this moment we're focusing primarily on the extensive contact tracing around these cases, and but we remain ready to, once our workload dies down, to resume our efforts in relation to supporting our colleagues in Victoria.
There've been fairly long waits at the pop-up clinic at Casula. Are you extending the opening hours? Are you setting up other clinics? So
the opening hours are being extended tonight, and we'll have the timelines for that, and we are looking at the possibility of extending, setting up another clinic in close proximity to Crossroads. I would urge the community to also take advantage of the clinics at Campbelltown, Liverpool and Fairfield if they live in those areas and it's equidistant for them to travel. And I acknowledge the patience of those people who have been at the Crossroads Hotel, and again, just thank you so much to the community for coming out and getting tested.
There's a testing clinic at Moorebank as well. Did they run out of test kits today and have to turn people away?
Look, I believe that relates to a private GP clinic that did run out or have some challenges with swab availability. Again, that's probably all I can say. It's a matter for them, but clearly we do also encourage people to get testing at their GP if that is more convenient for them.
Also, Dr. Chan, what is your advice on masks? So now, given the number of outbreaks in Victoria and also here, do you suggest that everyone should be wearing them, or is that only for people who are sick?
So the first line of defence is we don't want you out and about when you've got any symptoms, however mild. Now's not the time to be going to workplaces, to pubs, clubs or anywhere if you've got any symptoms. Please act cautionary. If you are out and about and you can't socially distance, then wearing a mask is a reasonable additional measure that you can put in place. but it shouldn't be at the expense of social distancing, and we wouldn't want people to fall into a false sense of security in relation to the need not to socially distance. When you're wearing a mask, it's important that it covers your nose and mouth, that you don't continually adjust it, and that you discard it safely and do not touch the front of the mask and contaminate surfaces. So it's important that if you are going to use a mask and you're in those situations where you can't socially distance, then just also follow those simple hygiene measures when you're wearing a mask.
With Casula, will you recommend to the Premier that we may need to lock down that suburb?
At this point in time, our efforts are focused on getting high rates of testing. And whilst the fact that I'm announcing that we've had 21 cases linked in one way or the other to the Crossroads Hotel or that cluster, to some extent that represents a success, because every one of those cases we can find, we can stop that ongoing transmission. I do urge anyone in the community to come forward for testing, even if you haven't been at the Crossroads Hotel, because we want to get any indication that the virus has spread more broadly in the community. At this stage, all of the cases that have been notified, and this situation can change rapidly, but to date, or just before coming into this press conference, all of the cases have been able to be linked to either attendance at the Crossroads or contact with another known case. If we see any emergence of cases that are not linked to the either known cases or the Crossroads attendance on those days, then obviously that will lead us to reflect on additional measures we need to take in that area.
In terms of hotel quarantine, why have there been some people allowed out of their hotel quarantine before the 14-day period?
So that's probably a matter for police, but there are a small range of exemptions that are in place where people are given exemptions, but it's a very small group, and police probably can best answer that question in terms of any leave beforehand.
And are we thinking anything about New South Wales locking down again? Is that on the cards at all?
As I said, we're just continuing to monitor this situation very closely, and we continue to reflect on what additional measures we need to have in place. But my key messages to the community at this stage are come forward for testing. I would love to see the testing rates hit that 20,000 every day of this week, and I challenge the community to come forward. I need to get all members of the community, so it's very important that in discussions with younger people who we know who are underrepresented in the testing, particular groups that may be concerned about going and get tested, that we actually all support each other to get tested at this critical time. Finding the cases will allow us to best understand if we have missed any chains of transmission, and will allow us to prevent community transmission taking hold in New South Wales.
With the Star Casino case,
Last question, guys,
was this person at Star Casino symptomatic? And how many people do you know yet were exposed to that person?
My understanding is that the person did not have symptoms when he attended the Star City Casino, and he may well not have been infectious. It's sometimes unclear, particularly when people have very mild disease, about the exact time of onset or the time of infectiousness. We also are advised that he was largely maintained within his group and really did not interact with anyone else. But obviously, for the abundance of precaution, we've let the community become aware of these sites where people may have been at who may have been infectious. But as I said, we're taking a very precautionary approach. And the key message is anyone with symptoms, please present for testing. And anyone who's been at that hotel between the 3rd of the 10th of July, the Crossroads Hotel, we're asking you to self-isolate, and please get tested regardless of whether you've got symptoms. But remember, even if you return a negative result, please stay isolated for 14 days since your last exposure to the hotel, and particularly like to also call out those that attended on the 9th of July at that Crossroads Hotel.
Doctor,
Thank you.
There does seem to be a link here, sorry, there's a link here with poker machines. Several of these venues have poker machines. Have you got to look at that issue in particular, given the hard surfaces and so forth as well?
When we've done the case, history is clearly that some people were playing poker machines, but it isn't a strong feature. A lot of them were consuming meals, and it was a party or a celebration for various work events, as opposed to us being concerned that the poker machines. Clearly we have strong guidance about the fact that when you're with any fixed hard surface and you've been there for a while, we need to have good cleaning regimes to wipe down the surfaces after you've finished using it. And they're sort of elements that we'll follow up with the various hotels, but that wasn't the major driver from what we can see in terms associated with the cases.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.